Dust devils danced around Boone's boots as three women blocked his path to the farmhouse he'd just bought. The tallest, arms thick as oak branches, smiled without warmth. "You must be the new owner." He clutched the deed, unaware it was a key not to ownership, but to a far stranger inheritance. Lavender hung heavy in the air, a deceptive scent of domesticity. "You must be the new owner," she said, her voice carrying the weight of someone accustomed to getting her way. But there was something else in her tone, something that made the hair on Boone's neck stand up. The other two women flanked her sides, equally tall and muscular, watching him with the intensity of predators sizing up their prey. Boone had traveled 3 days through rough terrain to reach this remote property. His life savings invested in what the seller promised was fertile land, perfect for cattle ranching. The isolation had been part of the appeal, a chance to start fresh away from the complications of town life. Now standing in the dusty yard with these three strangers claiming his space, that isolation felt more like a trap. "Ladies, I think there's been some confusion," Boone said, keeping his voice steady despite the unease crawling up his spine. "This is my property now. I have the legal documents right here." He held up the deed, the official seal still crisp and new. The woman's smile widened, revealing teeth that seemed too sharp for comfort. "Oh, we know exactly who you are, Boone Whitmore. We've been expecting you." The way she said his name sent a chill through him. How did she know who he was? The seller had assured him the transaction was private, that no one else knew about the purchase. "We've been living here for quite some time." The second woman spoke up, her voice deeper than her companions. Taking care of the land, keeping it warm, she emphasized the last word in a way that made Boone's stomach tighten with an emotion he couldn't quite name. The third woman, a redhead with freckles that dotted her powerful shoulders, let out a low laugh. "The previous owner made certain arrangements with us before he left. Arrangements that don't just disappear because of a piece of paper." Boone felt the weight of their stares like physical pressure against his chest. These weren't ordinary squatters or confused neighbors. There was something deliberate about their presence, something calculated that made him question everything about his purchase. The seller had been eager to close the deal quickly, almost suspiciously so. Had he walked into some kind of setup? "What kind of arrangements?" Boone asked, though part of him dreaded the answer. The tall woman's eyes glittered with something that wasn't quite amusement. "The kind that involve you staying here with us permanently." She paused, letting the words sink in before delivering the blow that would change everything. "You're going to have sex with us, Boone. All three of us. That's how this works." The words hit him like a physical blow, not from desire but from the sheer audacity and threat they carried. This wasn't seduction. This was something else entirely. Something that made his hand instinctively move toward the rifle on his horse. But what exactly was he walking into? And why did he have the sinking feeling that his deed might not be worth the paper it was written on? Boone's hand froze halfway to his rifle as the implications of the woman's words sank in. This wasn't some crude proposition from lonely frontier women. The way they stood, the confidence in their voices, the casual mention of arrangements with the previous owner, everything pointed to something far more complex and dangerous than simple intimidation. "I don't know what kind of game you're playing," Boone said, forcing steel into his voice despite the uncertainty churning in his gut. "But I paid good money for this land, and I'm not going anywhere." He dismounted slowly, keeping his movements deliberate and non-threatening, while maintaining eye contact with the leader. The tall woman chuckled, a sound devoid of warmth. "Game. Oh, Boone, this isn't a game at all. This is business." She gestured toward the farmhouse with a sweep of her muscular arm. "See, the man who sold you this property owed us something. A debt that doesn't disappear just because he ran off with your money." The redhead stepped forward, her boots heavy on the porch steps. "Marcus Vance made promises he couldn't keep. Said he'd work the land with us, be our partner in more ways than one. When that didn't work out, he promised us the next owner would honor his commitments." Her green eyes fixed on Boone with unsettling intensity. "That would be you." Boone felt the first real stab of panic. Marcus Vance. That was the seller's name. Though the man had introduced himself as simply Mark, the details seemed too specific to be a lie, too personal. How much did these women actually know about his transaction? Even if that's true, which I doubt, No man can make promises on behalf of someone else, especially not those kinds of promises. The second woman, darker-haired and broader through the shoulders than the others, laughed. You really don't understand how things work out here, do you? When you're this far from civilization, from law, from any kind of help, traditional rules don't apply. We make our own arrangements. The way she emphasized arrangements made Boone's skin crawl. He was beginning to understand that this wasn't just about money or property disputes. These women had created their own system, their own form of control, and somehow his purchase had walked him directly into their web. The deed is legal, Boone insisted, though his confidence was wavering. Filed with the territorial office, witnessed, sealed. Whatever Marcus Vance promised you personally has nothing to do with me. The leader's smile finally faded, replaced by something colder and infinitely more dangerous. Legal documents mean nothing out here when you're 3 days from the nearest sheriff and even further from anyone who might care what happens to a stranger. She took a step closer, and Boone was struck by just how imposing she was. Easily 6 feet tall with arms that spoke of years of hard physical labor. Besides, the redhead added, we have our own paperwork, contracts Marcus signed, agreements that specifically mention the transfer of obligations to any future owner. She pulled a folded paper from her pocket, and Boone's heart sank as he recognized what looked like official letterhead. The pieces were falling into place, creating a picture that made Boone's investment seem less like a business transaction and more like an elaborate trap. Had Marcus Vance sold him into some kind of arrangement deliberately? Was this whole property sale a setup to deliver him to these women and whatever scheme they were running? But there was something else in their demeanor, something he couldn't quite identify beneath the intimidation and threats. He sensed something almost like longing, as if this wasn't entirely about control or money. The way the leader's eyes lingered on him, the subtle tension in the redhead's stance. There were layers to this situation he didn't understand yet, and that uncertainty terrified him more than any straightforward threat could have. The document the redhead held looked official enough to make Boone's mouth go dry. Even from several feet away, he could make out what appeared to be signatures and an official seal at the bottom. His mind raced through possibilities, each one worse than the last. Had Marcus Vance actually bound him to some kind of contract through the property sale? You're bluffing, Boone said, though his voice lacked conviction. No court would honor a contract that involves forcing someone into whatever this is. The dark-haired woman stepped off the porch, her boots hitting the ground with authority. Who said anything about courts? We handle our own justice out here? She moved with the fluid confidence of someone who had never lost a physical confrontation, and Boone found himself taking an involuntary step backward. My name is Helena, the leader said, her tone shifting to something almost conversational. This is Ruth. She nodded toward the dark-haired woman and Magdalene. The redhead gave a small wave that somehow managed to be both friendly and threatening. We've been waiting for you for weeks, Boone. Marcus described you perfectly. The casual use of his first name sent another chill through him. How much had Marcus told them? What other details about his life did they know? Whatever Marcus told you about me, he had no right. I bought this property in good faith, and I'm not bound by any agreements he made. Helena's expression softened slightly, and for the first time, Boone caught a glimpse of something vulnerable beneath the intimidating exterior. Good faith, she repeated almost wistfully. That's refreshing. Marcus wasn't much for good faith, especially toward the end. She studied Boone's face with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. You're different from him, quieter, more substantial. Ruth circled around to Boone's left side, moving like a predator, but with an odd gentleness in her eyes. Marcus was all charm and promises at first, swept in here talking about partnership, about building something together. 3 months later, he was already looking for an exit strategy. He used us, Magdalene added, her voice carrying a hurt that surprised Boone. Took advantage of our hospitality, our work, she paused, searching for the right word, our affections. Then decided it was too much trouble and ran off with the money from selling the land we improved. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to form a clearer picture, though it wasn't one that made Boone feel any safer. These women weren't just squatters or con artists. They had been betrayed by Marcus Vance, And now they saw Boone as either their salvation or their revenge. So you see, Helena continued, moving closer until she was close enough that Boone could smell the faint scent of lavender soap on her skin. We have a legitimate claim here, not just to the land, but to what we were promised, what Marcus committed to, and then abandoned. Boone found himself studying her face, noticing details he had missed in his initial fear. The way her jaw set when she mentioned Marcus, the slight tremor in her hands when she spoke about betrayal. Whatever had happened between these women and his predecessor, it had left scars that ran deeper than property disputes. But there was something else in the way Helena looked at him, something that made his pulse quicken despite the dangerous situation. Was it possible that beneath all the intimidation and threats, there was genuine attraction? And more unsettling still, was he beginning to feel it too? The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken possibilities. Boone found himself caught between the rational fear of his situation and an inexplicable pull toward these three women who had upended his carefully planned future. There was something magnetic about Helena's confidence, Ruth's quiet strength, and Magdalene's fierce independence that he couldn't ignore. "Show me this contract," Boone said finally, surprising himself with the steadiness of his voice. "If Marcus really signed something that binds me, I have a right to see exactly what it says." Magdalene unfolded the document with deliberate care, and Boone stepped closer to examine it. The paper was thick, expensive, with Marcus Vance's signature clearly visible at the bottom, alongside an official notary seal. But as Boone read the terms, his confusion deepened rather than clearing. "This is a partnership agreement," he said, looking up at Helena, "for farming operations, profit sharing," and he paused at a particularly unusual clause, mutual support and companionship for all parties involved. The language was carefully crafted, legally binding, but vague enough to be interpreted in multiple ways. Marcus was clever with word, Ruth said, moving to stand beside Boone as he read. Her proximity was distracting. She was tall enough that her shoulder nearly brushed his, and he caught the scent of something warm and earthy, like fresh bread and summer rain. He made promises that sounded romantic, but were actually business arrangements, and vice versa. Helena watched Boone's face as he processed the document. "The land has been profitable under our management. We've built irrigation systems, improved the soil, established trade relationships with settlements 2 days' ride from here. Marcus benefited from our work for months before deciding he wanted out. But instead of honoring his commitments," Magdalene added, her green eyes flashing with renewed anger, "he found a buyer and disappeared with the money, leaving us with nothing but a piece of paper that apparently transfers his obligations to whoever bought the property." Boone set the contract down carefully, his mind working through the implications. These women had been more than partners to Marcus. They had been lovers, workers, and business associates rolled into one complex relationship, and according to this document, Marcus had legally bound any future property owner to step into his role. "Even if this contract is legitimate," Boone said slowly, "I didn't sign it. I can't be held responsible for agreements made by someone else, no matter what the paperwork says." Helena's expression shifted, and for a moment, Boone saw past the intimidating facade to something raw and vulnerable. "You're right," she said quietly. "Legally, you're probably not bound by Marcus's promises, but morally, we've invested everything into this land, into this arrangement. We have nowhere else to go." The admission hung in the air between them, changing the entire dynamic of the confrontation. These weren't predators trying to trap him. They were women who had been abandoned and were desperately trying to protect what they had built. Ruth stepped closer, her voice gentle but firm. "We're not asking you to honor every detail of what Marcus promised, but we are asking you to consider that we might be able to build something better together than any of us could alone." Boone felt his resistance wavering as he looked at each of them in turn. Helena's strength masked a deep loneliness. Ruth's quiet confidence couldn't hide the hope in her eyes. Magdalene's fierce independence was built on a foundation of hurt that she was trying desperately to protect. "What exactly are you proposing?" Boone asked. And even as the words left his mouth, he knew he was crossing a line from which there might be no return. The three women exchanged glances, and Boone realized that his answer would determine not just his immediate future, but potentially the rest of his life. Whatever came next, nothing would ever be simple again. Helena stepped forward, her imposing frame somehow less threatening now that Boone understood the pain behind her strength. "We're proposing a real partnership," she said, her voice carrying a warmth that hadn't been there before. "Not the half-hearted arrangement Marcus offered, but something genuine. We work the land together, share the profits equally," and she paused, meeting his eyes directly. "We share our lives." The weight of her words settled over them like morning mist. Boone found himself studying each woman with new eyes, seeing past the intimidation to the loneliness that had driven them to this desperate gambit. They weren't trying to trap him. They were trying to save themselves and offer him something he hadn't even realized he was looking for. "The three of you," Boone said slowly, testing the waters, "you've been together since Marcus left." The question carried implications that made his heart race with a mixture of curiosity and unexpected desire. Ruth nodded, a faint blush coloring her strong features. "We found comfort in each other after he abandoned us. It started as survival, but it became something more, something we didn't want to lose." Her honesty was disarming, and Boone felt his carefully constructed defenses beginning to crumble. Madeline moved to stand beside her companions, creating a united front that was no longer threatening, but strangely appealing. "We know how it sounds," she said, her green eyes locked on his. "Three women asking a stranger to join them in something most people would never understand. But out here, conventional rules don't apply. We make our own family, our own bonds." Boone's mind raced through the possibilities and consequences. He had come here seeking solitude and a fresh start. But what they were offering was the opposite: connection, partnership, and an intimacy that went far beyond anything he had ever imagined. The rational part of his mind screamed warnings, but another part, a part he had long suppressed, whispered that this might be exactly what he needed. "The physical aspect," Boone said, his voice rougher than he intended. "What would that mean exactly?" The question hung in the air between them, charged with possibility and uncertainty. Helena's smile returned, but this time it was genuine, reaching her eyes for the first time since he had arrived. "It would mean whatever feels natural to all of us," she said simply. "No pressure, no demands, just the freedom to explore what develops between us as we build something together." The honesty in her response surprised him. This wasn't about coercion or fulfilling some obligation to Marcus. This was about four people finding solace and connection in an isolated world where traditional relationships often meant nothing. "And if it doesn't work," Boone asked, though even as he spoke, he could feel his resistance weakening. There was something about the way Ruth's eyes softened when she looked at him, the way Magdalene's fierce independence seemed to include space for him, the way Helena's strength promised protection rather than domination. "Then we figure it out like adults," Ruth said simply. "But Boone, we've been watching you since you arrived. The way you handle yourself, the respect you showed even when you were frightened. We think it could work. We hope it will." The admission that they had been evaluating him just as much as he had been evaluating them somehow made the proposition feel more balanced, less like a trap, and more like an opportunity. But was he brave enough to take it? The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the farmyard as Boone weighed the most important decision of his life. Everything about this situation defied convention, challenged every assumption he had made about his future. And yet he couldn't deny the pull he felt toward these three remarkable women who had turned his world upside down. "I need to see what you've built here," Boone said, finally his practical nature asserting itself, even as his heart raced with possibility. "If we're talking about partnership, I need to understand what I'm partnering with." Helena's relief was visible, though she tried to hide it behind her usual confidence. "Of course, Ruth, show him the irrigation system you designed." The pride in her voice when she spoke of Ruth's accomplishments was unmistakable, and Boone found himself drawn to the genuine affection these women shared for each other. As Ruth led him toward the fields, Boone was amazed by the sophistication of the water management system she had created. Channels carved with precision directed water from a natural spring to carefully planned garden plots and grain fields that showed signs of careful cultivation and impressive yields. "This represents months of work," Ruth explained, her hands gesturing gracefully as she described the engineering challenges she had overcome. Marcus took credit for it when traders came through, but every inch was planned and dug by us. The bitterness in her voice when she mentioned Marcus was matched by the pride she took in her creation. Magdalene joined them as they toured the livestock areas where healthy cattle grazed and well-maintained pastures and a small but productive chicken coop provided fresh eggs. We've established trade relationships with 3 different settlements, she explained, her business acumen evident in the way she discussed profit margins and seasonal planning. The operation is not just sustainable, it's thriving. Boone found himself genuinely impressed by what the 3 women had accomplished. This wasn't just a farm, it was a carefully planned and expertly managed operation that had the potential to support all of them comfortably. More than that, it represented a level of cooperation and shared vision that he had never experienced. The house, Helena said, as they returned to the main building, has 4 bedrooms. We've been using 3, but we always hoped. She trailed off, leaving the implication hanging in the air between them. As they entered the farmhouse, Boone was struck by the warmth and comfort of the space. It wasn't luxurious, but everything was well-crafted and carefully maintained. The kitchen was large enough for communal cooking. The sitting area had comfortable furniture arranged for conversation, and everywhere he looked, he saw evidence of the care and attention these women had invested in creating a real home. "We're not asking for an answer today," Ruth said as they settled in the sitting area, her understanding evident in her gentle tone. "This is a big decision, and we want you to be certain before you commit to anything." But even as she spoke, Boone realized that his decision was already made. The attraction he felt wasn't just physical, though he couldn't deny the way his pulse quickened when Helena's hand brushed his arm, or how Ruth's smile made him feel understood in ways he had never experienced, or how Magdalene's fierce independence drew him like a flame. More than attraction, he felt the pull of belonging. These women had created something remarkable together, and they were offering him the chance to be part of it. The risks were enormous, but so was the potential reward. "What happens next?" Boone asked, and all 3 women smiled, understanding that his question was really an answer. The future stretched before them, uncertain but full of possibility, and for the first time in years, Boone felt truly alive. That evening, as they shared a meal prepared together in the spacious kitchen, the atmosphere had shifted from confrontation to cautious optimism. Boone found himself relaxing in ways he hadn't expected, drawn into easy conversation about farming techniques, trade routes, and the challenges of frontier life. The 3 women moved around each other with practiced ease, their partnership evident in every shared glance and completed task. "There's something else you should know," Helena said as they cleared the dishes, her tone carrying a weight that made everyone pause. "Marcus left us with more than just broken promises. There are debts he incurred in our name, people who expect payment that we can't provide alone." The admission hit Boone like cold water. "What kind of debts?" he asked, setting down the plate he had been drying. Madeline pulled a ledger from a drawer, her expression grim. "Supplies he ordered but never paid for. Equipment purchased on credit. He used our reputation with local traders to secure goods, then disappeared before the bills came due." She opened the book, revealing columns of numbers that made Boone's heart sink. "How much?" he asked, though he dreaded the answer. "Enough to ruin us if we can't pay," Ruth said quietly. "The traders have been patient because they know our work is good, but patience has limits. If we can't settle these accounts within the month, we'll lose everything we've built here." Boone studied the ledger, his business sense taking over despite the emotional complexity of the situation. The debts were significant but not insurmountable, especially given the productivity he had witnessed. More importantly, the women's honesty about the financial burden impressed him. They could have hidden this information until after he committed, but instead they were laying all their cards on the table. "Marcus really did a number on you," Boone said, his anger at the absent man growing. "But these numbers, they're manageable with the right approach." He looked up to find all 3 women watching him. "Hopefully, I have capital from selling my previous holdings, enough to settle these debts and invest in expanding the operation." The relief on their faces was immediate and overwhelming. Helena's composure finally cracked, tears she had been holding back for months, finally spilling over. Ruth reached for his hand, her grip firm and grateful. Madeleine simply nodded, but her eyes spoke volumes about what his offer meant to them. But I have conditions, Boone continued, his tone growing serious. If we're doing this, we're doing it right. Legal partnership papers, clear agreements about responsibilities and decision-making. And he paused, meeting each of their gazes in turn. We take time to let the personal relationships develop naturally. No pressure, no expectations beyond what feels right to all of us. Helena wiped her eyes, her smile returning stronger than before. That's all we ever wanted, Boone. A real partnership with someone who sees us as equals, not objects or conveniences. As the evening deepened, they sat together planning their future. And Boone realized that what had started as the worst day of his life might actually be the beginning of the best chapter he had ever lived. 3 months later, Boone stood in the same farmyard where he had first encountered the 3 women who had changed his life forever. The operation had expanded beyond their wildest expectations with new livestock, improved irrigation, and trade agreements that stretched across 3 territories. More importantly, the 4 of them had found a rhythm that worked both professionally and personally. Helena had become his closest confidant in matters of business strategy, her natural leadership complementing his financial acumen. Their relationship had deepened slowly, built on mutual respect and genuine affection that had blossomed into something neither had expected to find. Ruth's gentle wisdom and innovative thinking had made her indispensable as a partner, and the quiet moments they shared working together had developed into a connection that felt as natural as breathing. Magdalene had been the most cautious about opening her heart again, but her fierce loyalty and passionate spirit had eventually won out over her protective instincts. The morning she had first kissed him, spontaneous and unplanned as they worked side by side repairing fence posts, had marked a turning point for all of them. The arrangement that had seemed so impossible on that first day had evolved into something beautiful and functional. They had created their own family, their own rules, their own definition of love that worked for all 4 of them. There were challenges certainly, jealousy to navigate, decisions to make collectively, and the constant awareness that their lifestyle would never be accepted by conventional society. But the rewards far outweighed the difficulties. The legal papers had been drawn up and signed, creating an official partnership that protected all of their interests. The debts Marcus had left behind were settled, and the farm now operated in the black with healthy profits that they reinvested in both the business and their shared home. More rooms had been added to accommodate their growing success, including a proper office where they managed their expanding trade relationships. Boone had never been happier. The loneliness that had driven him to seek isolation in the first place had been replaced by a richness of connection he had never imagined possible. Each woman brought something unique to their partnership: Helena's strength, Ruth's innovation, Magdalene's passion, and together they had built something that was greater than the sum of its parts. As evening approached, the 4 of them gathered on the porch that had been expanded to accommodate their family dinners and evening conversations. The view stretched across fertile fields and healthy pastures, evidence of what they had accomplished together. "Any regrets?" Helena asked, settling beside Boone as Ruth and Magdalene joined them, with cups of coffee and the comfortable silence that came with complete acceptance. Boone looked at each of them in turn. These remarkable women who had confronted him with an impossible proposition that had turned out to be the answer to questions he hadn't even known he was asking. The conventional life he had planned seemed pale and empty compared to the vivid reality they had created together. "Only one," he said, drawing surprised looks from all 3. "I regret that it took Marcus Vance's betrayal to bring us together. We could have been doing this even longer." Their laughter carried across the evening air, the sound of people who had found exactly where they belonged. In a world that demanded conformity, they had chosen connection. In a society that insisted on conventional relationships, they had created their own definition of love. And in that choice, they had found something precious and enduring that would sustain them through whatever challenges the frontier might bring. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable tale where courage and unexpected partnerships collide in ways you never imagined. Don't forget to subscribe and consider a super chat to help us keep bringing you more stories like these. Your support means everything to us.